Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum where all voices matter. Our monthly panel is back again, although without regular contributor Sandra Pupatello. But Joe Oliver and Gary Marr are here and ready to discuss this month's issues. Joe was finance minister under Stephen Harper, and Gary was an Alberta Cabinet Minister and also Alberta rep in Washington, D.C. He's now head of the Canada West Foundation. Welcome back, guys.
Great to be with you.
Having us.
I guess maybe, Joe, start with you. Obviously, this is a monthly panel. I'd love to get both of your views on where we are economically. The markets were a little bit roiled over the past few days or so. What's your take on things, Joe? Start with you.
Well, a lot of negative news is coming to the fore. We have inflation 5.7%. In the United States, it's actually 7.9%, which has a rebound effect on us eventually. And as a result of that, the Bank of Canada and the Fed are both under some considerable pressure to address the issue, because inflation is a critical part of their mandate. In fact, in Canada, we have a single mandate, although the bank has to look at employment also, and that's to keep inflation down. And they've got a target of 2%, and we're well above that. And so there was this 50 basis point increase, which when it happened was no longer a surprise, but it's a shockingly large number, and the same in the United States. Without being too unkind, our central bankers misjudged the strength of inflation, which of course was exacerbated quite significantly by the Russian invasion into the Ukraine and the impact on energy prices and other commodities. So we've got talk of a potential global recession. I think that's a bit overwrought, but there's a lot of concern about debt levels, about insipid growth, about inflation, about high interest rates, and people are concerned. So the backdrop, the behavioral backdrop is negative, and it's having an impact, of course, directly and indirectly on economic growth. And Canada is of course confronting these short-term problems, but also has longer-term issues, which it doesn't seem ready to address in terms of demographics and poor productivity.
Gary Marr, what's your perspective on it?
Well, look, I'm not the expert in this that Joe Oliver is, but it does yield a couple of questions for me to ask Joe, perhaps. And that is, Tiff Macklin, was talking about, inflation being a transitory issue. I think he's now come to the idea that it is not just transitory and that it is a real issue. Raising interest rates is one of the tools in his toolbox. But if you were advising the governor of the Bank of Canada, how would you advise him with respect? What are the other tools that he can use to try and tamp down inflation?
Well, that's the major tool, dealing with the bank rate and using the bully pulpit. But also, you're unwinding the quantitative easing. It's now quantitative tightening, and that goes to reduce the money supply. I mean, in the old days, we could measure we could accurately predict what was going to happen when M1 and M2 increased. I mean, you knew there was going to be inflation, you knew interest rates were going to go up, and you knew there was going to be pressure on the economy and on the stock markets. Well, there was a disconnect for some time, and that was because the volatility of money had increased or had decreased, I should say, to compensate for that. But that's no longer able to prevent a reaction to an absolutely enormous stimulus program, a huge increase in the money supply. And so what the central banks have to do is is very cautiously, but in a determined way, increase rates. It's a delicate task, particularly since they're somewhat late in not
Right.
in making sure they arrest inflation, but not causing a downturn.
We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. We're here with our panel minus one. The Honourable Joe Oliver and the Honourable Gary Mar are with us, however. Just to finish off this conversation from the first segment, looks like interest rates are going up. Is it too soon or too late, or is that the right process for right now? Gary, we'll start with you.
Well, it's very difficult to say. I mean, it's going to have some impact on those individuals who are going to be renewing their mortgages over the course of the next 6 months. It remains to be seen whether it will result in, a downturn in the housing market. And that would be a tremendous indicator of a recession should that happen. Too early to tell, though, Tony. I think it's difficult to know exactly what's going to happen, but people are seeing the cost of everything going up, and I think that they're looking for answers from the federal government.
Joe, your perspective on interest rates?
Well, I think the Fed and the Bank of Canada really don't have a choice but to increase interest rates. The question is how many times, how fast do they do that? But it's pretty clear, given their mandate, that they're going to put priority on that issue over economic growth. And there is a risk, and I'm not saying it's an extraordinarily high one, but it's not it's far from insignificant that they could overstep, because it's an extremely delicate balance. But inflation, as I said, was 5.7% in Canada. Personally, I feel my inflation rate is considerably greater than that. And I think if you talk to a lot of people, they feel the same way too. It depends how it's measured and what personal consumer choices are or have to be. But given that, the behavioral consequence is of course that people take steps if they think prices are going to keep going up, and that tends to exacerbate the problem. So yeah, the central banks are somewhat late, probably not too late. They're going to have to be resolute for sure. Indeed. And carries risks.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, let's keep talking about housing. It seems that the cost of housing continues to be a topic of concern for Canadians. One issue that was certainly talked about in the latest federal budget, and it's also an issue that the federal Conservative leadership candidates are talking a lot about. So, Joe, I'm going to return to you first, then Gary. What are your thoughts about this as a kind of a political topic as well as an economic struggle for Canadians?
Well, I think it's a very big political issue, because you've got a whole generation of people who, without significant support from their families, just can't raise the money to buy homes. I mean, some of these prices are quite extraordinary. I know I have some family in Victoria, and $900,000 buys you very little in that city, which is not the biggest city in the country, and the numbers in Vancouver and Toronto are much higher than that. So, the dream of owning a home, which is sort of a legitimate dream we've always felt, is out of grasp to a lot of people, and therefore it's a huge political issue. Is it just demand? Well, no, clearly not. I think supply is a very important part of it, and regulation, or as Pierre Poilievre said, the gatekeepers has been part of that. We can build more if we get rid of some of the unnecessary regulation and liberate the private sector to go ahead, because immigration is starting again. The GTA traditionally had about 100,000 additional a population every year, and the government is talking about much bigger numbers going forward. So, on the one hand, they're concerned about housing. On the other hand, immigration is continuing, and I'm not opposed to that, but it does have consequences, and it's putting enormous pressure. And now with interest rates and therefore mortgage rates going up, affordability is even more out of the grasp of too many people.
No, great points. We're going to hear from Gary next, but we are going to take a brief break before that. So stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages. And we're back here at Boom Bust with the monthly panel. We've got the Honourable Joe Oliver, former Finance Minister, the Honourable Gary Mar from Alberta. Gary, your turn to talk about this housing crisis. I'm sure you're feeling some of the effects of it in Alberta as well, but give us your perspective on it.
Yesterday, I was in a meeting with a number of home builders here in the city of Calgary, and they were talking about how the federal government talks about affordable housing, but many of the things that have been done by governments across Canada, it deal with the edges of it. They talk about foreign ownership taxes, and trying to tamp down the demand. And it's really a small measure. Nobody's really talking that much about supply, and there needs to be a stronger connectivity between the private sector, which can provide some of these solutions, and governments at all levels, not just municipally or provincially or federally, but they talk about the frustration of trying to get permits done. Here in the city of Calgary, it's taking months, in some cases more than a year, to be able to get a permit to build a house. And so some municipalities are starting to permit things like laneway houses and things like that. That is a start, but it is not a complete solution. But all three levels of government have to be working more with the private sector, in my view, to provide some of the solutions on dealing with the supply. Joe talked about immigration. If you've got hundreds of thousands of immigrants coming in and your supply is not keeping pace with that, that's obviously a real issue, to making sure that you have affordable housing.
Joe, is that right? From your perspective, supply has got to be the part of the solution?
Yeah, I think supply is absolutely crucial, and I'm familiar, of course, with the Toronto market in particular, and there was just a denial that supply was an issue, was a problem. But if you talk to builders, as Gary alluded to, they're extraordinarily frustrated. I mean, clearly from a business point of view, they want to do more, they want to build. That's the business they're in. But they're making a public policy point that if you don't let us build, where are people going to live? And if there aren't enough homes, then the people are confronted with a choice of renting a tiny condo downtown or suffering an hour and a half commute, or moving out of town where there are fewer job prospects. So this is impacting on an entire generation.
Joe, I'm going to stick with you. We were talking off air about this extraordinary situation in the U.S., where in the first quarter, the U.S. economy actually shrank. It contracted by 1.4%, which, if that were to be repeated in the second quarter at the end of June, that could mean a recession. So is this a temporary blip, or are you concerned about this as well? What's your thought when you saw that?
Well, you have to be concerned, and we don't want a recession, technical or not. I would never bet against the American economy. I think it has an enormous amount of resilience, but it's got pretty significant problems now, because their spending, interestingly enough, is as a proportion to their GDP was greater than ours, and I mean, they've got more resilience. They can afford it better, but it does have it does have an impact, and we're seeing that in an inflation rate of 7.9%. I mean, we're getting to numbers that are truly scary. And if you got that number combined with an economic downturn, what you have is stagflation, which of course is the worst of all worlds. So, the Jay Powell, the chair of the Fed, has his work cut out for him because he's facing very high inflation and an economic downturn. So the point being of all this is that you can't expect a central bank, monetary authority, to solve all the problems. Fiscal policy has to contribute as well, and we have that issue in Canada with a profligate spending program, and you can't expect Tiff Macklin, the chair of the Bank of Canada, to solve the entire problem. The two policies have to work together.
We'll continue the discussion after this brief break. Stay with us. And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Joe Oliver and Gary Marr. Gary, you had a point you wanted to make about how the U.S. Growth or contraction affects Canada. Please make your point.
Well, Canada is a very trade-related economy. 2/3 of our GDP come from trade. So this is a significant part of the Canadian economy, and something in the range of 3/4 of our exports go to one marketplace, and that's the United States. So if there's a recession in the United States, that will have impact on Canadians in a very real and measurable way. It's the only point that I wanted to make, and maybe it does speak to the issue of making sure that we try and, as in Joe's words, have a more resilient economy. And maybe that means that we should be looking at diversifying our marketplaces. But the challenge in that is that we don't have the infrastructure to do it.
No.
And could we be doing a lot more to help, reduce the reliance upon our European allies for their reliance upon, energy from the Russian Federation? The answer is yes, if we had the infrastructure to do so. So trade infrastructure is a part and parcel with trying to have a greater resiliency in our own export-related economy.
Well, Joe, when you were Natural Resources Minister, you were big on, building the pipelines and the other energy infrastructure that was necessary. You ran into a whole whack of roadblocks, however, and we still haven't made much progress on that. Yes?
Absolutely. This is really it's a national economic tragedy. We have, as I've mentioned often, the third largest proven oil reserves in the world, the fourth largest natural gas reserves. The government has effectively canceled or had canceled over $100 billion in energy projects. We could now be generating tens of billions of dollars. We could be employing tens of thousands of people. We could be helping our allies, and we could be creating prosperity across the country, to say nothing of enhancing national unity. I hope there'll be a wake-up call here, and I think there was a poll done under the auspices of it was an Ipsos poll under the auspices of the Montreal Economic Institute, which showed that depending on the exact question, between 2/3 and almost 3/4 of Canadians believe that we should develop the infrastructure to bring down the cost of gas, to help our allies in Europe, and to reduce their dependency on Russian gas and coal, by the way. So Canadians are on side, and that includes Quebecers. The politicians are lagging in this regard, and the Prime Minister's obsession with green energy, which projects which are not going to miraculously change things for us, not for some period of time. I mean, he's missed out on an extraordinary opportunity. The opportunity cost has been, astonishing, tragic, and we still have the opportunity, however, to do much better, if only belatedly. But there's no sort of indication of that. But he should take a look at what people are thinking, what Canadians want, and Canadians want energy independence. They want prosperity. They want us to be a force for good internationally. They want us to help our allies. They want to help Aboriginal peoples, and this would be an extraordinary way to provide equity, revenue, employment to Aboriginal communities, who, by the way, are all in favor of natural resource projects that are close to their territories. You wouldn't know that by listening to the mainstream press, but it is a fact.
Yeah, no, it is. And of course, you got this clash with these hereditary chiefs. It's just a real challenge for our society, for sure. That's all the time we have right now. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us once again. And we hope to have the whole band back together next month with Sandra Pupatello joining us again. But thanks for your insights today.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tony.
Thanks to the panel once again. Always enjoyable to get their points of view. I hope you enjoyed as much as I do. Thanks for watching.